we're going to go from here into a discussion around empowering customer and community resilience. I don't think we could have had a better framework for this dialogue than the presentation that Sunny just provided. So Jason, you're going to be moderating this. I'll hand the microphone over to you.
All right. Thank you, everyone. We are running a little behind, but we are going to make sure we get plenty of time for this panel and also cut some of the time, some of the earlier sessions from some of the scheduling that got cut off. But I want to make sure we're going to definitely get a good conversation in. As Melissa, thank you so much for joining. I know your name has been mentioned a lot, so I'm sure you have lots to say, but I think that also proves a testament to all those here that ComEd and Melissa's Chief Customer Officer made the time to come and speak to the stakeholders here, given that we're literally like in the eye of the storm. In this session, we didn't customer and community resiliency is exactly what we want to talk about. So I'd like to invite the panelists all up here, and then they're each going to give you a short introduction of what they're working on. And Yann, I'll start with you.
One is better. Good morning. My name is Yann Kulp. As it says here, former director. The part of the fun journey of fleet electrification is that my previous company, NextEra Energy, a clean energy giant, has cut back a lot of its fleet electrification business. It's a testament to the fact that a transition to a new economy is not an easy thing, right? So if you're looking for a great sales person, I'm here, but we also have a lot of great data analysts and software engineers and people who have been affected. So anyway, I'm a sales guy. I'm not an engineer. I spent a long time with Schneider Electric. I created a startup in 2018 called EIQ Mobility. We built a really powerful fleet electrification modeling software that helps large corporations, fleet operators make really critical and complex decisions around the right vehicles, infrastructure, load profiles, financial impacts, carbon impacts. And Exelon and ComEd were one of my first clients. We did the entire assessment of all 7,800 vehicles from ComEd to the East Coast, and ran all of the modeling that enabled them to make hard decisions, which we'll talk about during the panel. And Calvin Butler, used some of that data to make really strong commitments for Exelon to decarbonize its fleet. So I'll turn it on.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here. Maria Kretzing from Bidgely. And man, we've had the first two sessions have really teed us up for what we're going to talk about. Bidgely is an artificial intelligence provider for utilities, but we really focus on how to use that to connect the customer and the grid and ensure that customers can be a part of a resiliency solution. And so I loved what we heard in terms of like, there's no solution without the customer. And there's no customers, really, no two customers are the same. And so, how do we meet them where they are? I know that is cliche, but how do we serve them in the way that resonates with them and give them the right information and education for them to make an energy decision, whether it be a new EV or getting on a different rate plan? So excited to talk about, how can we plan these customer journeys, engage customers for both the benefit, ultimately, cleaner, reliable energy, but also affordable energy for the customer, but also how can we leverage them so that the utility can have a reliable grid?
Good afternoon, almost, everyone. When you're in the midst of storm restoration, time just goes continuously, so you don't know what time of day it is. But, first, I just want to acknowledge this opportunity to have this conversation. When we were preparing for the panel, the goal was to have a conversation, and the prior two panels that I had the opportunity to witness did exactly that. So it was just great to experience that. But I'm Melissa Washington, and I lead customer operations for ComEd. I also lead strategic initiatives, which mean that in addition to the traditional organizations you have under customer ops, call center, billing operations, field and meter services, I also have the energy efficiency organization as well as workforce development, economic development, and our corporate relations, which focuses on our civic and nonprofit relationships. And I will tell you, you know, I remember coming from public accounting almost 21 years ago, and thinking when I moved into this industry, uh, very concerned that I was going to be bored. And the amount of change that I've witnessed in this last 10 years has been tremendous, and I still feel we're at the beginning. So it's a great time to be in this industry, and hopefully I won't disappoint my former colleague Dwayne and my current colleague Sunny too much in being able to answer some of the questions you posed previously.
Thank you, Melissa. So we'll jump right in and turn it back to you. Just that you're in the middle of restoration. Maybe just give us an update. We've heard a lot of personal stories from those in the audience of how things are going, where the crew's at, is everyone being safe? Um,
Well, the first thing I want to say is during COVID, we had a derecho that resulted in 13 tornadoes in August of 2020. That one we lost more than 800,000 customers, and it hit every single region in our territory. That was also one that we were able to restore under 5 days, and that was the same storm event that came from Iowa, and it took them, I think, close to 3 weeks, to restore. So we talk about the fact that customers never want to lose power. We never want our customers to be without power. You certainly don't want it in the middle of a pandemic. And what I will say is that we have continued to reinforce and understand, what investments are needed to, weather the storm, if you will. We've actually launched a study that we shared in beginning of 23, 22, where it talked about the continued impact of high wind storms that we knew would impact us from a climate change perspective, as well as excessive heat. And I think anyone who lives here, who's looked at the variation in weather that we've experienced just this summer, and you look at our study, it's demonstrating that the study is showing up in real life right now. um, what we saw with this particular storm at the height of it, well, let me say what was unique too. The frequency of these storms are also happening. So Sunday into Monday, we had significant storm system come in, a burst, and then we love naming them, right? The microbursts. So we had customers out then. So we're in storm one, Sunday into Monday. Storm two, we were preparing for it. And so we knew, based upon the weather forecast, that it was going to be severe, but even having a forecast is unpredictable. So we prepared for it, but it's hard to prepare for tornadoes, especially 9 to 10 tornadoes that are coming from different directions and really hitting the same area. So when you talk about the amount of outages at its peak, 400,000 for Storm 2, and we still were restoring Storm 1 on Tuesday, we have seen that number drop down tremendously. And we have projected that we will be at 80% restoration by 3 o'clock today. And I'm really happy to report that we are less than 80,000. We're right around 75,000 people that we're restoring. Clearly, having 75,000 people without power still is not our target. So we continue to leverage all of the assets that we have available to us, being people, which is why you've seen some people, not being able to stick to some of the panel participation today. We do deploy an all hands on deck approach when it comes to storm duty, and I know we'll talk about that a little bit more. But the reality is we're using all the tools that we'll probably talk about today to communicate with customers. We're using all the relationships to partner and collaborate with others who help ensure people are safe during this restoration. And most importantly, we continue to figure out, what other things can be done and what other things can be advanced from a resiliency perspective.
and today we heard This is the third largest city in the U.S. going through a major restoration, and then we also have the city of Houston, the fourth largest city in the U.S., going through a major outage and restoration. So when you put those things together and you think about the economic impact, it's not just utilities, the workers, and communities. These are big hubs for the world, right? There's lots of memes going on in Texas, for example, about the energy capital of the world can't get power back on. But it's cliche, but that's the world that we're living in today. So Maria, I wanted to use that to talk about how technologies, then there's a lot out there, obviously, can really help communities and customers become more resilient.
Yeah, certainly. And I will hit on a popular topic of artificial intelligence because that is one thing I specialize in, as does Bidgely. I think now 9 or 10 tornadoes, nothing technology can do about that, right? Let's just be honest. There's certain things that we're going to have to deal with as we face a changing climate. However, we can use artificial intelligence to better predict, what may happen, better plan the grid, and then better inform customers and even use generative AI for proper messaging. And so, one thing I'd like to highlight is the concept of there's no two customers who are the same. And we need to message every customer with that in mind. What Bidgely does is we're actually able to look at, their household profile, their personal profile in terms of finances and previous engagement, and then craft insights and messaging that help the customer understand. And so, in the case of storms, I think the primary thing is when's my power going to be back on? But in the case of maybe something more routine, like a bill payment or a rate, you can think about how can you inform the customer how much they may be paying at the end of the month, or really giving them that insight. Hey, you're trending much higher. It could be because, we've had significantly high temperatures. You're running that air conditioning. But we can give them really tangible messaging and not just, your bill's going to be high, but it's high for this reason. And here are very tactical ways that you can actually lower that bill. In the case of, Sunny had a really interesting comment about how supply and demand are becoming less aligned, right? Frankly, demand is just becoming really interesting with data centers, electric vehicles, other DERs coming online. And one thing we have the opportunity to do is think about, well, how can we use technology and customer sentiment or desire to align those? And so something, thinking about more routine is just a rate, as simple as time of use, right? Or maybe we get fancy and we go to real time pricing. But time of use, if you think about it, so many customers don't take advantage of a rate that's at their disposal that could save them a significant amount of money. So I'll give a quick example of one of my clients in New York. They were actually able to save their customers thousands of dollars simply by informing them first what's the best rate based on their current usage, all done by AI, all giving the customer that education and information with their own home in light for that customer. And then secondly, as that customer uses energy throughout the month, give them the education so that they optimize on that rate. So that seems really simple, but that's the first step, is just getting the customer on board, engaging them. Hey, you can shift your load. You can also save money. That's a win-win. That's the first step. And then obviously it opens the door for more advanced programs, more advanced demand response or engagement of DERs for that resiliency.
And Jan, you talked about in your introduction about your background in innovation with different utilities, and Sunny actually made some good points, like continuing. How do you push innovation forward, but in the context of all these coalescing forces? In the day, you got to keep customers uh, safe and reliable, and you got to do it equitably. But we still got to be pushing that innovation envelope. And can you provide some recommendations and maybe some project examples of how we can continue to do that?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? In addition to Exelon and ComEd, we just so happened did a really deep fleet assessment for Centerpoint, who are the guys who are dealing with Beryl, and for the city of Houston and Harris County and Fort Bend County. Um, and I think this is really interesting, right? Of course, I'm in the business of transportation electrification, decarbonization. Um, and there are incredible use cases that are incredibly suitable to that transformation, right? Some vehicles have predictable routes. They come back to the same depot every night. They have all that predictability and data that makes it economically and operationally feasible. But I remember really clearly from the work we did with Centerpoint and with Exelon that utilities have, you know, they have a responsibility to lead by example, right? And decarbonize their own vehicles. But they have among the most complex vehicles in that I am aware of, right? At least in the US, right? If you think about, a package delivery company, right? They have, 3, 4 different formats, and there's certain sort of routes and operations. But utilities, have dozens of different formats and have tools and hydraulics and cherry pickers, and they have incredible responsibilities in terms of storm response, right, and mutual assistance. And so that complexity of operations is insane. um, and so I think it's really important to also recognize that there are parts of operations that can be decarbonized, and there are parts that probably should never, right? Because you really don't want to have a battery electric truck when you have to be, 72 hours nonstop on the road repairing stuff, right? That's probably not a good idea. So I think it's a really important component of innovation is to think about where it is suitable and where it is probably not suitable in our lifetime, right? Because otherwise, if you have a sort of a very sort of totalitarian is not the right word, but absolutist sort of approach to innovation, you're sort of forcing a solution that is not suitable for all use cases, right? So I think it's really important, and it's extremely important when you're dealing with clients. I've worked with, you know, Keurig Dr. Pepper and JB Hunt and Ecolab and a bunch of San Diego Gas and Electric, bunch of utilities. And I think if you have a message of sort of total transformation, not recognizing resiliency and other operational problems, and you are actually doing a disservice because you're going to lose the client, right? And that's not productive.
Curious. Well, so I want to actually piggyback on both. So when we talk about customers, you're exactly right. All customers are not the same. We tend to use that as shorthand, but you have your residential customers, small business, commercial, et cetera, industrial. And what I have found with customers in terms of communication, they all have their preferences. So I think one of the questions that was posed to Sunny in the midst of the storm that we're in, how are we engaging and communicating with customers? And I will tell you, it's a multi-layer approach because, and this is in a storm situation, but in everyday interactions, customers just have their own preferences. One way, that we, definitely make sure that they have access and information they need is looking at outage maps. And they're able to take a look to see, not only what's going on with their outage, but what's happening around them in the community. We also, utilize social media for people to even report outages to us. They can just, use is it X and Facebook and other social media to get to us to make sure that they know it. Fortunately, we've been able to invest in the system previously where we do have smart meters, so we're able to ping the meters and we know what customers are out and what customers are restored once we do the investment. But I also have learned through engagement that we've had in the community. Right now, I head up customer operations. Previously, I did external affairs. And one of the projects that we launched during my tenure in external affairs was the microgrid that we implemented in Bronzeville community here. And the Bronzeville microgrid was our step towards understanding different alternatives for resiliency. And that investment was done in collaboration with our regulators and also other stakeholders who were interested in understanding community resiliency. That project and the approach to it was clearly, I won't even call it collaboration, it was the development of a relationship. Because what I learned very early on, especially with some of the Bronzeville stakeholders, very, very sophisticated, very engaged. And so if you do it on a transactional basis, you won't go as far. If you just kind of think you're going to come in, tell them, hey, we've got this microgrid or we have these sustainability efforts that we think you'll benefit from, and then you walk away and you're not sustaining that relationship, you're not going to go very far. We have been engaged with the Bronzeville community on a pretty deep level since 2015 and really supercharged it in 2016 when we launched the Community of the Future. And the Community of Future was really a learning lab where we could work with the community. We established an advisory community participation where it included the local alderman's office. It included sustainability leaders in that community, CHA, et cetera. Everyone that had a stake in that community, including Illinois Tech, was part of that advisory association that we established. The other thing that we did that they actually told us was different than some of the prior approaches. We didn't go in and say, here's all the things that we have available to us, and we're going to do all these things. We actually asked them, what are your priorities? What matters to you? And from that conversation, we started learning that there are connected points, common goals, and we went at those goals together. Some of the things we were able to implement beyond the microgrid was lighting that did not have to be connected to the grid. It was solar powered, wind powered. We also worked to advance STEM education in the community and engage the students in that particular community. Not only does it have Illinois Tech, but it has tremendous middle school and high schools there, historic high schools, and we engage them. We also started to understand, well, what are some of your challenges from an economic perspective, employment perspective? And we had a very significant workforce development job fair. And that job fair was important because all of our partners came that were working on the microgrid and also interested in advancing the workforce in that community. And they came and did hiring, from the community. So the reason I use the word relationship versus collaboration is because customers and stakeholders will tell you how they want to engage with you. And from there, you're able to advance things such as energy efficiency enrollment, which was also important to us because there's diversity in the economic status of the customers in that community. And we wanted to make sure that everyone participated because we do believe that in any sustainable strategy, energy efficiency is really one of the first steps into getting into something deeper. And we have here in Illinois a very fortunate policy that allows us to support and incent the efforts of everyone, clearly from residential all the way to our big industrials, to help move towards energy efficiency.
Thank you, Maria. You mentioned I think your customer in New York, but are you guys seeing more of the customers sharing these stories and sharing how they're being successful?
Yeah, so I think actually across our clients, so across utilities, one thing we're seeing is a lot of learning and experimentation. And actually, maybe I'll start with this as something I find refreshing is that I've seen over the past 5 years far more pilots and then also far more openness to share both the highs and lows. So I'll give another great example, a client in the Pacific Northwest, Avista. Similar to Bronzeville, not quite the same, but they have a connected communities initiative where they wanted to form not a formal microgrid, not quite up to the par of Bronzeville, but they wanted to form this virtual power plant in a disadvantaged community. And that project started over 3 years ago. And to be honest, the initial rollout was not what you might deem successful. And so they really had to look at it, bring in partners, including Bidgely, to say, how can we help and assess, why the engagement level wasn't there for this project? And they also, I'll say another one of our clients, but also others, that aren't even Bidgely clients, they brought in Nova Scotia Power and some other utilities and also asked for best practices and shared their best practices. And over the past 3 years, one thing we've done is how can we actually increase the engagement, specifically using analytics to drive just essentially higher return on the investment they were making. And in this case, we were able to Bidgely, another vendor, plus the Connected Communities team at Avista, identify over 200 DERs in the community and successfully enroll not quite 200, but over 120 in the program. And so that was a huge win, and it was not immediate at all. And I think a really positive thing I'm seeing is that utilities are working together more, and also honestly vendors are working together a lot more to form partnerships where, maybe Bidgely doesn't have the implementation side, but we can partner and use our software. Implementer can use their experience, utility can use lessons from others to drive that forward. And I liked the question from Angie earlier, so I'm going to give her a call out. She was like, what can we do in the next 3 months? One thing I also see that's a huge lesson learned is how can utilities start small today? Um, Perhaps with or without regulatory buy-in, are there ways you can really push forward with a small customer stakeholder group or with a small experiment, leveraging your team of vendors? And I see that being more and more successful as we're exploring some of these just unknowns and really pushing the envelope. So for vendors or utilities, what can you make happen? What small pilot or experiment can you do in the next 2 months and then share that with others?
All right, thank you. We just have a few more minutes left, but Jan, I think with electrification being such a hot topic right now, and it's great for like the center points and the comments. There's usually large utilities, large resources, lots of expertise. But what's your advice to some of the smaller stakeholders out there? Maybe 100,000 customers, 200,000. How do they get started on that journey for electrification and providing that to their customers?
Yeah, one of our till recently really great customers was Ameren in Missouri. Been working with them for years, and I think it's really interesting. Like fundamentally, any fleet, whether it's a utility fleet or if it's Martin Brower here in next to the airport, huge transporter of food for McDonald's, or if it's the city of Chicago or any Intron enjoying Intron engineering, Shireen is in the back here. All of these companies have vehicle, whether it's a large corporation or a small local community town company. And I think Maria's point about piloting is critical. Like when you're implementing something new that has never been done before, it's terrifying, right? And like a lot of new technologies, you don't have a track. There's no track record. You can't go to somebody and say, "Well, if you deployed 10,000 vehicles for the past decade, what does it look like?" Nobody's done that, right? So just as important as earlier is recognizing what can be transformed and what should not be in the foreseeable future. I think it's really important also to be very humble in ambitions and saying your goal is not to transform your entire operations overnight. I think that would be suicidal, right? It's operationally risky, it's financially risky, there's no track record, we don't know, right? And it's not me. Like nobody knows, right? Like you could go and ask GM and Ford and anybody. Like nobody knows. So starting in a very tangible, practical way, let's identify 3 of your facilities. Let's identify 15 vehicles in each, right? And let's actually go and do something real in a risk and cost controlled environment, right? It's a sandbox. First of all, that mitigates risk, right? So, again, if you're PepsiCo, right, you need to deliver soda. And if you're a school district, you need to deliver kids, right? And those are mission critical jobs. They have to be done. Um, so doing things that are controllable, right, creates a sandbox where you can go and test things. And you do that for 3 years, or you do that for whatever time frame and then enables you to start iterating. But I think it's really, I think vendors want to go fast, which is normal, but it's important to not go fast because you're going to lose people on the way.
Yeah, I think there is it trumps into it moves into the conversation where I think the question was education. How do you educate customers? And education is key because most people are not they don't have the data, that they need to make the decisions, and that's exactly what you were just saying, Jan. If you start small, they can then understand what that data is telling them. It builds their confidence, that there's a benefit on the other end for them. And then it gives them the courage to move further faster. And that is one thing I will say is pretty common no matter who you are as a customer. Everybody wants to understand that what they're going to invest their time in is worth it, but you have to start somewhere. Some people need incentive to understand, that they can do it with the least amount of investment at risk. Some people need to do it to understand that their time won't be consumed so great that they can't maintain their day to day. And I find that especially among customers who are participating in some of our energy efficiency programs that are for income eligible customers. They don't understand how the value will be there for them because they have many other things that's on the list. That's everyone. But you have to find a way to start somewhere because once they see the data, once they see the benefits, they're all in. And not only they're all in, our customers are the best advocates. So just like you said, in the business world and in the vendor world, we're sharing, more. Our customers are sharing more too, and they're serving as testaments. And we've seen that with some work that we've been doing around, building work in energy efficiency and how people are in association. Some people are out there, they've done it, and then they come back to their associations and say, hey, by the way, we've done these 10 strategies and this is helping us and this is how it's helping us cut our bill in half. But in addition, it's also made us resilient because we can ride through an outage and keep the building temperature pretty stable for hours. So it's really starting with information and education, proving the why and the benefit and the value, and then turning them into advocates.
Melissa, following up on this, this reminds me. So a longtime friend of mine is a lady called Claire Butterfield, and she started Faith in Place, and now Brian Saunders runs that, right? And extraordinary organization that uses communities of faith, right, as um, an environment to share these examples, and then share, among their peers, of how to actually transform energy communities, right? So, energy efficiency, but you do it in a context of people that you trust in small communities, and then share that. Is extraordinary. Yeah.
All right, we had an awesome panel, but we have another great one coming up. Melissa, Maria, Jan. Hopefully, you'll be around for some of the rest of the day. We got lunch coming up. We got one other amazing panel. You guys stick around for, and then we'll have some good time for networking. I want to thank my fantastic panel up here for sharing some great insights. I think sparking the conversation, but also sharing some really real world examples of how we progress. And then Melissa, again, very grateful for you taking some time to share with us during the restoration efforts. Thank you so much.